Welcome to Healing the Spirit, a space where we awaken our creativity, deepen our connections, and remember who we are through the lens of astrology, archetypes, and art making. I'm your host, Jonathan Coe. Hello everyone, welcome to this podcast. I am super excited to be sharing with you a series of episodes where I answer questions that I received from my Instagram community. So a few weeks ago, I did the whole sticker thingamajig and I told people, I was like, hey, I'm going to go on the podcast. I'm going to create some solo episodes of just me answering your questions as best as I can. And specifically, I was soliciting questions about learning astrology. And I got so many juicy questions. At first, I thought it was going to be this casual thing, but no. So much flowed out of me. And I just kept, going and going. And I think if I were to compile all of these questions, they would be like 3 or 4 hours long, maybe a little bit more. So first of all, thank you for everyone who submitted the question because I really love answering questions about learning astrology. If you love me answering questions about astrology, I would love to know because maybe I'll do more of these episodes. It was just so fun to create. Just a reminder before we get into it that my course with Britton LaRue, Astrology as Praxis, will be starting on September 10th, 2022, and registration will be on August 26th to 28th. I'm super excited to not only be teaching astrology, but also to explore various pathways that you can use to integrate astrology, individually as well as in a community. Using astrology, yes, to help you understand yourself, right? That is definitely the point of this class. But also to expand your idea of who you are as a cosmic being and your role, your participation, your agency within this larger cosmic body. It's really a robust container, a beautiful, sturdy curriculum where we really actively invite in all of our faculties, right? Our mental, intellectual faculties, our emotional, spiritual, somatic faculties, to participate in learning and ultimately unlearning astrology and creating the astrology that we need and want in this moment. Check out our course page if this resonates. All of that will be in the show notes below. Okay, so back to the questions. Because they were all so rich, I really didn't want to fit this into 1 or 2 episodes because I think that might be a little overwhelming given how the episodes have so many different topics. And so I'm trying a new format here where I'm going to break it up into many different smaller pieces. So you're going to see episode 26 to 31 being these Q&A episodes. Episode 26 is where I cover a couple questions. One of them is really about what to say or how to deal with naysayers of astrology. And then the other one was really about how do we reconcile being a unique individual, right, with unique birth charts, as well as being, categorizable using the language of astrology. And so to me, these 2 questions are a little bit more philosophical and they really speak to like this duality of like the inner skeptic and the outer skeptic. So I grouped them together, and then episode 27 is my personal recommendations on learning astrology. So if you are interested in doing that and you think you will benefit from, a list of resources and me kind of reviewing those resources, listen to episode 27. Episode 28 is pretty technical. It's where I talk about houses, aspects, and stellium. I find that these 3 subjects are really the subjects that are for like advanced beginner astrology students are very much like alive, because we don't tend to talk about houses or aspects in like memes, so people don't really know about it that much. So if you feel ready to go into like the nitty-gritty of astrology, go to episode 28 for houses, aspects, stellium. And then episode 29 is where I talk a little bit about my current approach to interpreting natal chart, as well as where I stray from tradition. So this is an interesting episode. I think this one may be the more controversial one, if that's what you're into. Episode 30 is like my astrology ritual and practices, as well as a major life transit, which in this case, Pluto transiting through my very packed fifth house. So episode 29 and 30 are both a bit more on the personal side. Like they're really kind of my take on things. So if that's what you're interested in, or if you're interested in hearing my life story and my journey with Pluto, then definitely listen to episode 30. But both of them are pretty personal. And then episode 31 are really the miscellaneous questions that I couldn't really find a place for in the other episodes. They're really about Lionsgate and then housing contract and Chiron in Cancer. So yeah, I hope that you enjoy these episodes. Please also know that if you're listening to an episode where there are numerous questions, you can always skip ahead using the timestamps below in the show notes, right? So yeah, that hopefully will come in very handy, and you will find that very useful. If you are like, oh, I'm not really interested in this question, just jump ahead. And then finally, all of the intros are going to be the same for episodes 26 to 31. So you can, if this is your first time listening to the intro, well, you got to the end of it. And if this is your second episode that you're exploring, then totally just skip to the questions, right? Don't feel like you need to listen to the intro again. And you can use the timestamps for that. Okay, cool. That's me being my Virgo rising self, letting you know about all of the little details. And I think that's it. So enjoy this episode. Actually, more like this series of episodes that are super juicy, super exciting, pretty nerdy, and I will see you on the other side. So, the first question that I feel like answering is one from Steph. So Steph asked, how do I deal with the naysayers of astrology? I feel so discouraged. Well, first of all, Steph, my heart goes out to you feeling discouraged when you are... I want to speak on this first from a human perspective. I don't know you super well, but I feel like the resonance of your question and the implication of your question is far-reaching, because a lot of us feel a certain level of alienation in pursuing an interest or a study or a curiosity that may not be validated by those around us. So I first want to speak to that, and then I will talk about the naysayers later. So what I will say about this feeling of feeling discouraged is that there are many different layers to it. The first one is that what I'm sensing into is to validate how tired you are of feeling like maybe those around you or people that matter to you do not take your interests seriously. I'm going to share something from the perspective of my own life, because that's the only perspective I really have, which is that throughout my life, I have always been someone who is interested in a lot of different things, and a lot of those things tend to be things that are invisible to the human eyes, meaning invisible to the ocular visions of humans. And some of those things are music, and also astrology, and also mysticism, and also connection to the realm that's unseen, as well as the dimension that is unseen between different humans. Or sort of the subconscious, maybe, is more how people in the psychology world would talk about it. And the story of my life has been that most of the time, people who are around me did not have the same respect for these things. And so I have had to go against the grain. I have had to go against the current of those around me when I am new at exploring this new thing that I'm interested in. And this, to me, is the root of my discouragement, right? Like when I feel discouraged, often the root is that I myself also am still figuring things out, and I am not entirely sure if this is worth pursuing, but I know that I'm curious. I know that I'm pulled. And somehow I keep bumping up against an external wall where I feel like the people around me can't understand me, or they don't want to understand me. So I just really want to validate if this is your experience, or if this is the experience of any of you listening, that this is very real. Those of us who are artists, those of us who are mystics, those of us who tend to be people who are maybe sensitive and in touch with some of these things that are more abstract or even more energetic rather than concrete, can feel really invalidated in this world and in this overculture. And I'm telling you, you are in good company, because so many of us feel like that. And so my first question to you is around this feeling of being discouraged, because to me, I felt discouraged whenever I am tuning in to the wrong frequency. I am tuning in to the wrong radio station. I am tuning in to the sounds of the other people, and I'm hoping to be validated by these people. And there's almost a part of me that is interested in going deep into a particular area of interest because I need to be seen by these people. And that, I really just want to give a huge energetic hug to that part of you and that part of myself. And I want to have full compassion on that part that feels wounded, that doesn't feel seen. And also, I would encourage, or I would invite you to also look into another part of yourself that is so interested in this, that despite what others around you are saying, you're going to learn it no matter what. You're going to find out more about it no matter what. Full disclosure, when I first started becoming serious about learning astrology, I was just doing it in the privacy of my own little world. I had my astrology teacher, and I had my books, and I had the community of the people who were in the same astrology learning container that I was, and I didn't tell anybody else about this for a while. And so I would almost maybe encourage you to gain comfort, to find comfort, to find your own place within that more solitary space, right? One of my teachers, Britton LaRue, always talks about the chrysalis as being that which eventually will give birth to the butterfly, right? Like the chrysalis is where the caterpillar needs to dissolve itself before it can transform into a butterfly. And so my sense is that perhaps what you are really needing is to validate yourself that currently, in this moment in your path, you just need to be within the chrysalis, and that there's nothing wrong with that. That maybe this is your journey and yours alone, at least in this moment in time. And then another thing I will say about that is that I want to go back to this idea of tuning into the wrong radio, because you are living, and I say this with a lot of love and compassion, and really not from a place of blaming, right? But really more from a place of noticing. When we are working through our own insecurities or our own maybe trauma, what can happen is that we look to the naysayers, right? I still do this all the time. Part of working with my own inner critic has been around, yes, acknowledging that the naysayers are there, both internal and external, right? And that there are also people, on the other hand, who are very interested in what you are interested in. There are people who are so enthusiastic about learning astrology. There are people who are so enthusiastic about talking about astrology. I mean, if you haven't checked out the astrology podcast, there are people, like literally the name of the podcast is the astrology podcast. There are people out there who create 4-hour episodes on Saturn alone. I mean, if that is not evidence of how geeky and nerdy and into it people get with astrology, I don't know what is. So I would really encourage you to begin, if it's not totally available to you, to tune out from the naysayers, right? Begin turning your attention the other direction, turning your attention towards the communities, the people who are really interested in this, right? And focus on that for a while. Because I don't know about you, Steph, because maybe you are an expert astrologer, but I am guessing, my intuition tells me that maybe you are still learning the ropes, right? Maybe you're still figuring out astrology for yourself. And so allowing yourself to stay in that space for a while and allowing yourself to be in this nice little cocoon of me and my own life force energy is just going to be directed towards my interest in astrology. And if you feel the need to talk to other people about astrology, then I would really encourage you to begin setting an intention to opening up your field and meeting people who are interested in talking with you about astrology, because there are so many of us out there. Okay, so I've talked about you and I've talked about the feeling of being discouraged. Now I want to move on to this topic about the naysayers, because what is so funny about naysayers in general is that naysayers always think they are so original. Like, that is literally the thing that naysayers build their identity upon, right? Like, naysayers build their identities upon feeling original, as if they were the first person to point out how ridiculous astrology is. Guess what? If you go back and if you check out the history of astrology, especially in the global West, you will see that astrology has been ostracized for centuries, right? There are even periods of like close to 200 years where astrology is not even able to be disseminated in writing form, or where astrology have had to kind of hide under the umbrella or maybe even mutate in order to be accepted in the Western society. And so this whole thing about naysayers towards astrology, first of all, is very real, and the consequences to astrology as a study, as a system, has been significant. Like, this is well documented that there have been many naysayers of astrology in all different time periods. So I'm going to give my favorite example, which is in late 19th century, early 20th century, someone named Alan Leo basically revived natal chart readings, or kind of began to bring it into his practice. And instead of calling it a birth chart reading, he had to call it personality analysis because at that time in England, if you practice astrology, you can be thrown into jail. And so it's interesting to see that just from Alan Leo, right, working with the limitations, the societal, the philosophical limitations around how astrology is perceived in the West at the time that he was alive, just by him working with that, right, we see then the development of what is later going to become psychological astrology, which is a branch of astrology that essentially sees the birth chart as reflecting the inner psyche, right? Or desires of one's psychological leanings. Or as this, so psychological astrology really sees the birth chart as descriptive of a person's personality, right? Or a person's behavior. And so, and prior to that, when you look at, for example, much earlier, right? Hellenistic astrology was born during a time when astrology was mostly used for predictions. And so astrology in its roots was totally divinatory. And yet astrology in the West has had to adapt in order to continue to live on, right? So in some ways, I also want to bring in a perspective that naysayers are always going to be there, right? And our job is not to soothe the naysayers. Our job is not to answer to the naysayers. Our job, especially if you are interested in becoming a consulting or a professional astrologer, or you want to teach astrology or hold space using astrology or whatever you want to do with astrology, your job is not to answer to your critics. Your job is to show up fully for the people who can benefit from what you're doing, who can benefit from your studies. And so I also want to bring in this perspective that naysayers sometimes shape the trajectory of a particular field. The naysayers of astrology in late 19th century, early 20th century, in some ways ended up giving birth to psychological astrology. Now, if you let that simmer for a while, you will be amazed, right? I'm thinking now about myself. When I was a child, when I was in late elementary school, grade 5, grade 6, I started getting bullied very badly. And to the point where I really felt so alienated and I felt like I had no friends. Also, I was a sensitive child who did not have any conception of what it meant to be a sensitive person. So for a while, my life was kind of hell. But in that space, and I'm not being Pollyanna about this, right? I recognize that bullying is very real. And I hate hearing when anybody is bullied, including cancel culture, which is for another conversation. But to me, when I look back on my experience of having been bullied, it gave me a perspective. It sets me on a trajectory that I otherwise would not have. And so when I look at myself today, my ability to maybe hold space for others or to have compassion for people within their learning journey who are frustrated, or when people feel like they are outsiders, outcasts, I really have to attribute that to the experience of having been bullied. Now, will I want to relive that again? No. Will I want to wish that upon my worst enemy? Absolutely not. And at the same time, I was made by that experience. That experience shaped me and shaped the trajectory of who I became today. So, what I want to say, long story short, is that naysayers have their place too. Now, I don't know exactly what the naysayers are having in your, or saying in your life. Maybe they're just saying like things like, oh, astrology is not real. and things like that. And I think it's really I want to validate you if your path is to I want you to really feel into yourself at this moment. Because I have friends whose path is to speak to the naysayers, is to have conversations with the naysayers. And at the same time, for me personally, that is not my path. I am not interested in naysayers. I do not care what they think. I do not care. I only care about the people who can benefit from the work that I'm doing and who are interested in the stuff that I'm interested in. To me, that's more interesting and that's much more nourishing. And that's just where I'm being called to serve, who I'm being called to serve. And so I want you to feel into yourself, and I want you to really honor your own process. And I want you to know that your curiosity, your interest, your excitement towards astrology and towards learning astrology and applying astrology and playing with astrology is very valid, and that you can do whatever you want. Don't listen to them, Yeah. This question is from Madison. How does one juggle the concept of each individual being completely unique and categorizable through astrology? The first thing that came to my mind is that isn't this a conundrum that we also have with just being human in general? To me, being human has so much to do with us being individuals and totally unique. Like, for example, the shape and the size of my heart or the shape and the size of my liver is necessarily not going to be the same as the shape of your heart or the size of your liver. And yet, a lot of us have hearts. I actually don't know. Is it possible for anyone to not have a heart as a human being? I will have to Google that later. And a lot of us have livers. And that doesn't take away from our individuality or our shared humanity. And so that's, I think, the first part of my answer, which may seem very obvious to you. And also, what's coming up for me too is I know exactly what you're talking about, because I feel like perhaps what you are communicating is this tendency of using astrology to stereotype people, to stereotype behaviors. It's like, oh, all Leo suns are blah, 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 right? And I think, I don't know, I'm still thinking about this because I feel, even as I'm just saying that, I feel like heat rising through my body. And I'm not interested in using astrology that way. I'm not interested in using astrology to stereotype. To me, astrology is really a magical language. And to me, the point of magical language is to open portals. It's not to be, the answer in the back of the textbook, right? It's not to be the destination. To me, magical practices and magical languages and magical systems really open us up to a dimension that perhaps we are not fully able to articulate or fully able to access using the language that is at our disposal, right? Or the systems that are at our disposal. And so in that sense, I find it much more interesting for astrology to be, or one's natal chart, to be a contemplation, to perhaps be an abstract love letter that the planets left us with, right? And the point of our life is maybe, or for those of us who are interested in astrology, the point of the life is to figure out what exactly that specific letter means to us, and in what ways can that letter, that love letter that was a snapshot of the planet's conversation at the time of your birth, projected onto a two-dimensional space, right? A two-dimensional circle, what the natal chart can tell us about some of the challenges that we see and some of the ease that we may experience within this lifetime. To me, this is something that is so much at the heart of my astrological journey, because there's a bit of a paradox that I noticed in my own astrological journey. I was first interested in astrology because I wanted to I really wanted to understand why I was feeling so stuck in my own life. I wanted to get closer, to become more friendly with my birth chart, because I was feeling really frustrated. And that's just the honest truth of it. I was frustrated with how my life has been going up to that point. I was frustrated by the fact that I had dreams and hopes and aspirations, and I worked really, really hard in my life, and it seems like I couldn't get to wherever I wanted to go. So I really started off from more of this like disillusioned hero kind of place. You know, I wanted to go on that hero's journey, and I wanted to win. I wanted astrology to tell me how I can become a famous musician, or at the very least, tell me why I couldn't be a famous musician. And I think for a while I was using astrology like that too. I was using astrology as shadow work. I was using astrology as helping me to figure out how to better live my life. What are some of the patterns that I don't like that are causing trouble in my life, and then trying to extract that, from my life. But the deeper I go into my astrological studies, the more that I see that astrology is really about the study of the music of the cosmos. It's about the song that the cosmos is creating, or the symphony that the cosmos is creating, and the ways in which all of us can participate within that song. And if that's the case, then to me, humans are always not as special as we like to think we are, right? And also, I don't know if I would even think about astrology as categorizing. At least in my own practice, I've distanced myself from the categorizing, even though sometimes I do it for fun, right? But I think it's plenty clear when I do it that I'm joking about it. That I'm really almost playing with these stereotypes, which also is a very valid way of approaching astrology, right? Like for fun, to make us laugh, to make us feel seen, right? I think that's totally valid. And also, I see it more as each person, like no two Aries suns will relate to their Ariesness in the same way. And this is kind of the magic of archetype, in my humble opinion, because archetype almost speaks to that deep well of energy, right? That's something that we can feel into, and we can interpret based on our lived experience. So to me, archetypes don't speak to us in the language that we don't understand, if that makes sense. So let me kind of backtrack here, right? What I'm thinking about is, for example, the archetype of the goddess Kuan Yin and the archetype of Virgin Mary have similarities, right? In terms of what they encompass or what they represent or what they symbolize. And yet they are filtered very differently through different cultures and different personalities and different people and different lands. And so to me, astrology is kind of like that too, in that how you interpret the Aries archetype is going to be very different than how another person interprets the Aries archetype, because you have very different life experiences, right? And at the same time, there are probably going to be something that matches in your experience. So to me, this both andness, right, of like our unique birth chart, our unique life experience, which, by the way, is not necessarily the same, right? So let me slow down with this point a little bit, or expand on this point. To me, the birth chart and the person's lived experience are not necessarily one-to-one correlation. Like, to me, I like to think of each person as having their own spirit, each person's path as having their own spirit, and then the birth chart also having their own spirit, right? So the birth chart, to me, I see it more as like kind of a map, right? Like I can look at a Google map and I can decide how I can get to Apple Store on 14th Street in Manhattan, right? And there are going to be many different paths to getting there. And even if both my partner and I took the exact same route going to the Apple Store on 14th Street in Manhattan, our journey is going to be different, right? Because if we take it during different times, we're going to see different people. The streets are going to look different. The sky's going to look different, right? And so in a sense, to me, the birth chart is kind of its own thing. And it's like up to us as people who are interested in astrology, as people who are astrologers, or people who are interested in applying astrology, to kind of go to the chart and be like, hey, how can I get inspiration to think about this particular situation in my life right now? Or how can I get inspiration to begin seeing a different way of looking at the situation that I'm currently feeling stuck in, or not super happy about, or actually feeling really blessed about, and then feeling like my nervous system is completely busted out, because this amazing thing just happened. I never expected it, and now I don't know what to do with myself, right? So to me, astrology is more about inviting curiosity, inviting a way of looking at ourselves and a path of inquiry, both for ourselves and for other people, right? Meaning astrology can also be used as almost like a social lubricant. Astrology is a language we can use to connect with another person. Like I can say to another Pisces sun, hey, there seems to be some things that we share in common. And so in some ways, astrology almost becomes like a way that we can connect with another person. So I like to think of it like that. Like on the one hand, astrology allows us to get more curious about our own lives, about the lives of others, about our own unique individual path in life. And we can also use astrology to foster connection, right? We can understand that our experiences are really not even that unique, at least on an energetic or archetypal level. And that brings a certain level of humility to it, because to me, it really puts me in my place whenever I look at my birth chart and realize, oh, other Pisces suns are also dealing with the same Neptune transit, or like, oh, my Pluto in Scorpio is currently being transited by the North Node. And so there's a certain flavor of experience that we're all having with each other. So to me, astrology is a system, right? First of all, like let's talk about what astrology even is, right? To me, astrology is really a system that is designed by humans in order to describe the experience of being connected to the cosmos, right? And so if that's the case, if my thesis, if my definition of astrology is correct, then the implication is that astrology is going to be inherently complex. Astrology is going to be inherently messy and inherently, in some ways, almost non-descriptive, or not able to describe in a way that is always true at all times, right? Because our lives are inherently messy. Our lives are inherently uncontainable, uncategorizable, right? And so in some ways, astrology is always going to be gnarly because it's a system that tries to reduce or to formulaically put our experiences into a framework that we can understand. And that framework is always going to break because our lives are so much bigger than astrology. So I hope that answers your question. I feel myself really in a transmission space there. And yeah, I hope you got whatever you needed from that transmission. All right, I hope that you found this episode to be interesting, thought-provoking, helpful to you. As a reminder, there are a bunch of other Q&A episodes around this episode, really from episode 26 to 31. So if you want to hear me talk more about different questions that people submitted, feel free to really find a topic that's interesting to you. And if you're resonating with this episode, definitely check out Astrology as Praxis. It's going to be a year-long journey of learning astrology, integrating astrology, understanding both yourself and the world around you using astrology as a framework for, really practicing what it means to be human. Britton and I would love to see you in the container if you resonate with our voices. If you enjoyed this podcast, please subscribe, rate, review this podcast, and if you're on Apple, I would love to receive your review. Something new that I am currently creating is some content that I will share with you as a gift if you write some reviews. So if you do write reviews, please take a screenshot before you submit it and then send it to me on healingthespiritpodcast@gmail.com. And then I will get back to you when the bonuses are ready. Just want to say that this is a practice that I find inspiring from one of my teachers, Sabrina Monarch. So I'm like, I want to do the same too. And it will be a totally different content, obviously. But just naming Sabrina as my inspiration for reciprocity. Until next time, I hope you take good care of yourself. And I'm sending you so much love. Thank you for listening.